The movie begins with a voiceover by Petrovic, who says that the Bible claims we should rejoice in our suffering because it produces perseverance, character, and hope. However, he is still waiting to find joy in suffering. The scene shifts to West Mesa in 2009. A woman named Diane Cross is walking with her dog, Duke, when the dog starts digging the ground after seemingly finding some bones buried beneath the surface. Alarmed, Diane quickly calls 911, prompting law enforcement to begin their investigation. As they uncover more bodies, Detective Young believes that one person couldn't have done all of this. Meanwhile, the police conduct a raid on the house of a man named Felix. Before the police can invade, another man shows up at Felix's place. Inside, Felix is handing Keezers some cash when the police storm in and arrest them both for drugs and illegal ammunition. At that moment, Chief Carter's statement about the buried bodies is broadcast. The chief states that about 6 weeks ago, a citizen came across human remains while walking her dog. She immediately reported it to the Albuquerque Police Department, and with the help of crime scene investigators, they discovered the remains of 11 women and one unborn child. He also reveals that the remains have been sent to forensic pathologists to help identify the victims and determine how and when they died. Reporters start asking questions, but the chief says they can't discuss any further information. After the broadcast, the chief tells Detective Young and Detective Ortega that the mayor wants to bring in the FBI for the case, and they are sending over one of their profilers who they need to pick up in 2 hours. The duo then picks up Agent Petrovic, who asks to be taken straight to headquarters instead of his hotel room. When asked if he has any leads on who the killer might be, Petrovic jokingly claims that even Young or Ortega could be the killer. Seeing Young not amused by his joke, Petrovic clarifies that even after examining the crime scene and the evidence, the best he can do is make an educated guess. Talking about serial killers, Petrovic explains that they can be categorized into 4 types. The first category is visionary. This type of serial killer hears voices. The neighbor's dog might tell them to kill someone and they would do it. Next is the power control-oriented serial killers, who prefer playing God, treating life and death as if they are at their whim. Then there are the hedonistic killers, also known as lust killers. These individuals are into mutilation, drinking blood, and cannibalism. However, Petrovic believes that the person they should be looking for is a mission-oriented killer, who thinks he's making the world a better place by getting rid of people who cause him to sin. Petrovic then describes what the man could look like: a Hispanic male in his 30s, extremely religious, arrested at least once for solicitation of prostitutes, and living in proximity to the Boneyard. After Petrovic's presentation, Young and Ortega seem rather annoyed by his presence. They argue that he has come to give them a crash course on how to do their jobs and is wasting time when they should be out there gathering real evidence. Later, Young notices Ortega on the phone, telling someone that they have sent in the DNA to be processed. It might take a while, but they'll soon find out the truth. Next, Young and Ortega interview a sex worker who claims that once a man threatened her with a gun to sleep with him. He was a big Chicano guy in his 30s named Caesar, with a tattoo on his arm. She tried to save herself by grabbing the gun, but it turned out to be unloaded, so she had to run for her life. She also mentions that around the same time, she had a run-in with a dirty undercover cop named Tate. According to rumors, the pregnant girl found on the mezzo was impregnated by Tate, so he got rid of her. Next, Ortega tells the chief that he wants more information about an officer named Tate in the narcotics department. Tate was once suspended for misconduct and faced a few complaints about faulty arrests in exchange for sexual favors. Back in the spring of 2003, he came face-to-face with his accuser, a savvy hooker named Maria Orta, and intentionally ridiculed her. However, the union red tape was not enough to terminate him, so he got suspended before being reinstated. The chief explains that a former sex worker revealed that the girl Tate knocked up went missing after she told him he was the father, and suspiciously, the girl they found in Mesa fits that description. The chief then tells Ortega to keep the information to himself, while he mentions that his next is to cross-reference the names of missing persons with the list of missing prostitutes from 1999 to 2006. In a flashback from 2004, Petrovic is helping his teenage daughter Sam change her car tire when suddenly a man shows up out of nowhere and opens fire, killing Sam.
Come on, wake up, honey. Come on, get up.
Later, Ortega is investigating some prostitutes when he receives a call from Young asking about his whereabouts. He lies to her before meeting a girl named Candy. He shows her a picture of the missing girls, hoping she might have any information. Initially, Candy couldn't care less, but then Ortega mentions that one of them is his niece Selena. Hearing this, Candy reveals that one of the girls is her sister Flaca, who went missing a month before Selena. However, she refuses to say anything more than that. Ortega urges her to come to the station, look at a few pictures, and make a statement. That way, they might even be able to find out more about what happened to her sister. Candy is still reluctant, but Ortega gives her his card in case she changes her mind. Just then, a car shows up and a guy is seen kicking a girl out. Ortega immediately asks him to stop, but the man flees. The man arrives at a house, screaming and crying, wanting to be kept away from the cops. He enters a room, lies on the bed, and the scene changes to the same guy walking into a convenience store. He heads straight to the fridge and sanitizes his hands before taking a drink. The owner appears to know him and asks Keezer if that's all he wants. Just then, a girl enters the store. Keezer can't help but stare at the girl. In an awkward moment, he asks her if she needs someone to walk her home before leaving. Back at the headquarters, Ortega receives a call from Candy, telling him that she's ready to talk. When Young asks about the call, Ortega lies, saying it's his friend. Later, Ortega meets Candy, who is now willing to make a statement about a missing person. Candy reveals that she, along with Selena and China, went to a hotel room where they did drugs and hooked up with guys. However, Selena appeared a little distracted that day. Later that night, while they were on the block, Selena got a text from Tate before a car showed up and she left. That was the last time they saw her. In a fit of rage, Candy accuses Tate of killing all the girls in the Boneyard. After that, China died of an overdose, leaving Candy all alone. Returning to the day Selena went missing, Candy tried to reach out to her several times but got no response. That same night, Selena's body can be seen being buried in the Boneyard. The next day, Ortega finds 4 missing girls that match the profile of the missing pregnant girl, and surprisingly, the girl's arresting officer is Tate. Ortega presents his investigation to Petrovic and the chief, and they are impressed by his findings. Ortega reveals that 20 of the girls who went missing from 1999 to 2000 had arrest records, and 12 of them were arrested by Tate. The Sheik is flabbergasted at the possibility that the serial killer might be an undercover cop. They can link 12 of those missing reports to Tate's arrest records and charge him with it. However, the chief wants complete certainty before authorizing it. Ortega comes up with a plan to match Tate's DNA with the baby. If the DNA reports from the Mesa match Loretta Garcia, one of the 4 girls. On his way back, Petrovic thinks about how Tate matches exactly the kind of guy they're looking for. A mission-oriented killer looking for his next prey. We then see a teenage girl at the amusement park, who could be Tate's next prey. Later that night, the body of the same girl is seen being buried. The chief, who has been busy with the investigation, calls home to talk to his kids, but unfortunately, it's too late, and they're sleeping. A flashback of young girls being dragged into a car at gunpoint appears. The chief was one of the officers carrying out the raid, during which several Mexican police officers were martyred. The case is becoming more personal with Ortega's niece and the chief's dead colleagues. The next morning, Agent Petrovic and Agent Womack meet with the chief. Petrovic had told Agent Womack about Tate being the prime suspect, but unfortunately, the FBI has been investigating Tate, and he's not the killer. The chief appears rather annoyed by what the FBI has been doing behind their backs. However, Agent Womack believes that in matters of sex trafficking, it is better to involve fewer people. Indeed, many of the girls Tate was supposed to arrest ended up at his mansion, and the FBI was hoping those girls would lead them to the cartels. Instead, they were killed. The FBI is willing to provide resources and Petrovic's help to find the killer. Ortega is not convinced by what the FBI has to say and still believes that Tate is the killer, and that he's going to prove it. After that, Young confronts Ortega about sidelining her, but Ortega leaves without giving a satisfying response. Next, a girl is walking to the bus station uptown alone when someone offers her a ride, which she gladly accepts. Meanwhile, Ortega is at the narcotics department meeting with Detective Graham, hoping he would let him talk to Tate, claiming he's a possible murder suspect. Graham calls Tate into his office. During the one-on-one chat, Ortega confronts Tate about his involvement with the girls. He also questions why he transferred from Vice to narcotics. Tate argues that he transferred to keep himself out of trouble. However, Ortega laughs in his face and mocks him. Ortega openly tells Tate that they are investigating him and his relationship with some of the girls found in the Mesa. Hearing this, Tate gets annoyed and leaves. Later that night, Tate is getting drunk at a bar when he has a flashback of the day Selena was last seen. He's trying to lure Selena into sleeping with him in exchange for dismissing her charges. Later, while Tate is in the men's room, Sergeant Graham shows up and beats him up for becoming the prime suspect in an elaborate murder scheme. Graham is not happy with the attention Tate is bringing to his squad. As a dirty cop himself, Graham is afraid that the deal he made with the criminal organization will be affected because of Tate. The next day, Ortega meets his sister, Nina. Little does he know that Young has been following him, and even took pictures of him. Inside, Ortega asks Nana if Selena is still in contact with people from their old neighborhood, and finds out that Selena was friends with a girl named Eliza and her boyfriend, Felix. Ortega takes his time to console his sister before leaving. Meanwhile, Agent Womack is busy carrying out her investigations and has narrowed down their list of suspects to a dozen men. Later that night, a black car shows up at the block and picks up a hooker. Moments later, the man is seen choking the girl in the back of his car, her struggles becoming weaker and weaker. He then grabs a hammer from the front seat and uses it to kill her, ensuring she is dead. After that, he drives to a remote location and buries her body, covering any traces of his crime. The next day, Ortega meets Felix and asks about Selena, hoping to gather more information about her disappearance. Felix reveals that Selena lived with him for a while before he kicked her out, and speculates that she might have been sold to traffickers. Later, Young meets Sergeant Graham to get information about the case and Tate's involvement in the whole thing. She also mentions that Ortega is hiding something from them, so they team up and start their own investigation. Later that night, Graham is on the phone with someone stating that he made a deal with the organization and their interests are his top priority in exchange for taking care of him and his boys. Once again, a black car shows up and this time picks up Candy, who is then brutally killed and buried. The next morning, Graham meets Ortega to negotiate with him, but he soon realizes that Ortega will go to any length to find the truth, and in the process, he and his squad could get into trouble. Afterward, Graham meets Young and hands her a file containing all the information about Ortega. Meanwhile, Petrovic is investigating the convenience store owner, who claims to have seen most of the girls from the Boneyard case. Keyser was a regular customer, and the killings began when Keyser started visiting the store more often. Recently, Keyser came to the store to get his usual drink, and the owner noticed him checking out a teenager. The girl appeared visibly uncomfortable and scared, which also freaked out the owner. Later that day, Young visits Nina's house to find out more about what Ortega is hiding and notices a picture of Selena with Ortega. Meanwhile, Graham raids a house and arrests a guy named Pablo Ruiz. He offers him less jail time in exchange for providing false testimony that could implicate Tate. Later, the chief confronts Ortega about a confidential informant who's pointing the finger at Tate. However, Ortega believes Graham is framing Tate to protect himself, but decides to go along with it to get Tate in jail. However, Ortega's evidence against Tate is weak, and the DNA test shows that Tate isn't the father of Loretta Garcia's baby. Ortega's theory is flimsy, and it isn't enough to keep Tate in prison. Based on the profile, Petrovic concluded that the serial killer could potentially be Keyser Molto. He lives about a mile from the Mesa site, has been working as a cable installer for the past 20 years, and has been arrested for soliciting prostitutes, but he goes to church every Sunday. The FBI has 2 agents stationed in front of his house, watching and waiting for him to do something. They will also be talking to some women to find out if they had any interactions with him. Young tells the chief that one of the victims is Ortega's niece. One of Caesar's victims, Nella, spoke out about her experience. She was a sex worker and remembered Caesar because he was different from her usual clients. He seemed tense and distracted. He told her his mother had recently died and mumbled that God's grace would help him stop all sin. Then he began to choke Nella. Luckily, Tate was nearby and helped Nella escape. Meanwhile, Petrovic had the FBI constantly watching Keyser. One night, Keyser carried a body from his house to his car, planning to dispose of it. At the same time, Ortega follows Tate, hoping to catch him doing something illegal. When Ortega saw Tate with a sex worker, he felt he had a case. Tate noticed Ortega following him and fled. Ortega gave chase and eventually crashed his car into Tate's. Tate was bleeding and Ortega held him at gunpoint. During the confrontation, Tate confessed that he did not kill Selena. He claimed he had dropped her off at the block before another person picked her up. Meanwhile, at Caesar's house, the FBI agents arrested him and found evidence linking him to multiple murders. Keyser explained that the dead girl in his car was the result of a sex act gone wrong. Petrovic received a call confirming Keyser's capture and the discovery of crucial evidence. Although Petrovic believed Keyser was a killer, he wasn't the one they were looking for. Ortega met with the chief and informed him that Tate had confessed that Graham was a corrupt cop who forced witnesses to lie and abuse his power. At this point, Ortega began to think Tate might be innocent. He had strong evidence against Sergeant Graham, which was then used to arrest Graham. Back at headquarters, Petrovic told Ortega he wanted to catch the killer as much as he did. Petrovic blamed himself for his daughter's death, believing she would have survived if he had captured the killer sooner. Later, while Ortega was at his sister's house, he received a call informing him that the police had come across more dead bodies in the desert. Although Detective Ortega had been taken off the case, the sudden discovery required his presence. The movie ends with the chief asking him to come to the scene immediately. What do you think of this recap? Please drop all your thoughts in the comments section below. One like from you and maybe subscribing would be great support for us. And that's it for now. See you in the next videos.